So recently my writing on the music blog has created somewhat of a thread between some records that led me back to this interesting place that I was exploring in 2018, the origins of Dungeon Synth before it had that name attached to it. Now there are 3 cassette records from the mid-90s here that were really interesting to check out and sort of serves as an origin point for the thread that I talked about the next few videos that will be on this channel. So you will hear these referenced to, however, I thought I would actually bundle all 3 of these together for a single video, so that's why this is a bit of a different format and something special. So anyway, let's jump into it. My recent return to Dungeon Synth music via Ornithopet had me on a curiosity binge, another plunge into the depths of internet search results, aiming to learn more about the genre. I stumbled onto a treasure trove, a list of over 300 records, leading me to discover this classic cassette released by a German duo in the genre's infancy. With retroactive ears, the influence is obvious and astonishing. However, my enjoyment of such a gem may have been tarnished by hearing the trail of successors to this sound beforehand. Despite the name, Depressive Silence is a rather mellow and peaceful musical project that has some distant hauntings of darkness beyond the realm of its ethereal, fantasy-driven atmospheres. They may have first steered the genre into more adventurous territory than its gloomy, dark, dungeon-alike origins. With big and vivid synths and organs, the music brings on a hypnotic persuasion as its thick backbone of ethereal thog is graced by luscious, serene melodies that echo medieval ideas similar to Thief. The music transpires in a meditative state, undoubtedly helped along by its low-fidelity recording that muddies and muffles the clarity of instruments, allowing the reverb and textures to inspire an elusiveness that feels grandiose, heavenly, and deeply mysterious. I find myself often envisioning clouds and pearl-white sky cities peeking out between the layers of cloud. It's minimal and powerful. This lo-fi approach lets simple compositions of 2 to 4 layers come to life in the ambiguity of their chemistry. This self-titled record is a wonderful, calming and hypnotic listening experience, soothing, mystic with a natural vibe. For me, it's very much a unique, visionary take on the scarce Dungeon Synth sound. Its first 2 songs are utterly fantastic, however the following track tends to blaze the same trail with a little less magic. They may pale in comparison, but it's still magic nonetheless. Really impressive record, no doubt it would have a bigger impact on me if I didn't know this sound so well already. Continuing our journey through the nostalgic realms of Dungeon Synth, I cast my mind far back as memories reach commands. Into my mind popped this strange cassette I obtained well over a decade ago. My memory of how and why I got Midnight Fullmoon are vague, but I remember finding the band names somewhat hilarious. The music itself didn't captivate me since I only listened to it once. At the time I had no knowledge of Dungeon Synth, or if that term had even been coined yet. It was just a strange and peculiar piece of music from the early days of a now evolved and blossomed sound. Its opening track wanes in a balance between harsh, cheesed synths and whirling, spellbound waveforms in the background. They relish the low-fidelity setting and start to conjure the dark and indulging atmospheres one might expect. The following track nails this, a primitive composition pinned by a beating heart as the sound of raindrops lowers the tone and thunderstrikes reinforce a lonely, gloomy setting steeped in an eerie and mystic vibe driven by its subtle synth lines. Track 3 is one I remember, or more so the familiarity to a well-known melody which I couldn't pin down. The music is fine, but the aesthetics are just too bold and punchy. It stands in contrast to what came before it. At this point, a direction, arcing theme, or sense of place fails to define itself. A swampy song is clustered with a selection of sounds including trumpets that seem to pull it in multiple directions, only to be followed by a dizzying 6-minute experiment with techno synths and buried electronica drums. It too suffers from an arsenal of contrasting sounds that fail to gel. A brief uplift from the short "The Last Rays of a Dying Sun" is a brief glimmer, as the following track plays around with bells and recurring themes of unsuited instruments chiming in with one another in an unmusical fashion of gap filling. It's easy to point out flaws and focus on negatives. If I were to rid myself of the focus, a charm does emerge, one of mysticism and distant voices of despairing figures. Its dark allure has a safe distance, and a couple of passageways do strike something of memorability, especially that ever-present heartbeat. Another consideration is how primitive this was. I have no idea as to how these ideas spread beyond tape trading and its relation to the black metal scene. Although records like Depressive Silence had far more to offer at its time, this could be seen as a jewel if isolated in its inception. There are interesting and intentful ideas at play here, they are just far behind the then curve. Continuing our exploration of the dark and dingy Dungeon Synth realms, I found this solo record by Rau, one half of the German Depressive Silence duo. Working under the moniker Gothmog, an orcish creature from the J.R.R. Tolkien realm, Rau brings us this cassette release limited to 300 copies, but makes a firm shift in direction from previous ambitions. Its cheap and cheesy Casio synth tones are a fond reminder of Lord Leviticus's trolldom, but despite the Lord of the Rings inspired name, there are no hints of this being an early example of Tolkien inspired dungeon synth. It does, however, have all the hallmarks of that classic sound. Bold, punchy and dated synth tones work their charm through the mysterious nostalgia of low-fidelity recordings, harbouring a stream of fantasy melodies. The music often drifts into calmer settings as it gets going, with bells and flutes sprinkling some charm over otherwise gloomy organs that dominate the undertone, giving it some pull to the dark side, but mostly Medival Journeys is a humble, pleasant and at times dreamy and mysterious. And yes, it is misspelled. The varying quality of the tracks makes for an interesting listen. The atmosphere doesn't shift too far, but its fidelity sways when bright acoustic pianos punch in fiery chords and choppy melodies over energetic string sections. It can get a touch blurry. With frequent progressions and shifts in the palette of instruments, the music is continually engaging, and its final proper track, Night Passion, includes some rather plastic, vibrant synth-pop tones to great effect, alluring to the Depressive Silence style. The inclusion of a bonus track before the outro is a poor decision. Its opening notes don't prepare you for the dirty, gritty and completely muddy snarls that are about to drop in. After a few minutes, the already weak song starts to mess around with a very peculiar phase distortion sound that buries what sounds like gothic chants. It grows in presence and starts to sound like a guitar, but more so a wreckage as more ugly, filthy screams groan in dissonance. It's a poorly executed song that butchers the balance of fidelity and sours the ending of an otherwise solid listening experience. The outro track, just a minute long, is fantastic though. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to see some more of my music blogs, go check the website out. Every page has over 1,000 articles sorted by artist, year, genre and more. Just hit Ctrl F and have a search for something that interests you. You can find a link to the blog in the description box down below, where you'll also find links to my other YouTube channels. Check them out if you are curious. Thanks again for watching, and be sure to subscribe to catch the next upload.